Let's say you've got to the point where you can play the chord tones through a progression, you can clearly outline it, you can maybe even swing a little bit, but it sounds just a bit simple and a bit straight. So you want some more harmonic colours. Often what people do is they go to chord scale, so they might go to something like the Mark Levine Jazz Theory book. But what if I was to tell you that there's a way you can get all of those colours without learning or playing a single scale? This is the subtle art of chord substitution, and these are my 5 essential chord substitutions. Hello, welcome to Jazz Star Scrapbook. So I think chord substitutions might be the original way of playing jazz harmony from a time before there was really any jazz pedagogy as we understand it today. So why learn them today? Well, one thing I really like about substitutions, they get you into the colours really fast. You're just playing a chord on top of another chord, and that chord contains at least one, maybe more, fruity notes that can make your playing and your chords and your lines and everything else sound a bit better, to use a technical term. One downside of it is this requires what Mick Goodrick would call derivative thinking. So you're not thinking, for instance, okay, I've got a D7 and I'm going to play a D7 altered on it. You're thinking, I've got a D7 and I'm going to play, for instance, an A flat 7 on top of it. So you've got to do a bit of a conversion in your head. That's the hard bit. So because of that, you're going to need to apply them through a few tunes, a few different keys and things before they start to click. You're investing time in something that's going to be useful again and again as you go on with your playing.
Nice.
Okay, a note on 2 chords. So what we're going to do for the purposes of this video is convert them all into 4 chords. It just makes stuff easier, right? It's basically, instead of playing 2-5-1, I'm a 4-5-1 kind of guy. What we're going to do is we're going to convert 2 chords into 4 chords. So for instance, if I got this progression, D minor 7 going to G7, C major, that's a 2-5-1. 2 minor 7 goes to 4, so that's F. And you can play F major 6, which is exactly the same notes as D minor 7, believe it or not. Or you could play something a little bit richer, like an F major 7, going to G7, going to C major. Okay. Where it comes in really handy is with the minor key ones. For instance, in C minor, we might be going D minor 7 flat 5, or D half diminished, G7, and then to C minor, right? We take this D minor 7 flat 5 and we turn it into an F minor 6. Again, it's the same thing. They're inversions of each other, just like this F6 and the D minor 7. These are the same notes, the same pitch set, with a different bass note. I find it, and I suppose most people do, a lot easier to think about F minor than about D Locrian something, you know, whether it's D Locrian or D Locrian sharp 2, whatever it is. This is a much more conventional sound. And again, I can use a richer minor of some kind. I'm not limited to using minor 6, although minor 6 is a great sound. We can resolve that to G7 and then to C minor. And with C minor, I like minor major 7th or minor 6th, or just a plain minor triad for the one chord. We don't use minor 7ths unless we're playing more in a modal style. Okay, so that leaves us just 3 sounds really: major, minor, dominant. Now, let's start with dominant. Dominant chords are the most commonly substituted in bebop. That will give you a really good leg up into basic jazz harmony. Okay, so I'm furthermore going to split the dominants into 2 categories. There's colour dominant, which is a dominant that sits around and you want to explore a bit and it's all lovely. And there's resolving dominant, which is the dominant that's moving onto another chord, right? Right, colour dominant. This is going to be minor on dominant. It's called important minor in Barry's teaching, or a 2-5 relationship. It's called often in more mainstream jazz education. So on a C7, we move to a G minor. And this can be really any G minor you fancy. So I'm just using a minor triad, minor major 7th, minor 7, minor 6th, like a line cliche there, but any of those will work. I want to give an example from Charlie Christian, who's one of the all-time great minor on dominant players. And he likes to use a minor 6th on a dominant. So for instance, I've got a G7 from his solo on I Found a New Baby. I have me playing it somewhere on the internet. I'll probably put a link up. And he's playing on this, in this case it's G7. He's going to use a C minor sound. So he goes, he walks down to the 6th, the major 6th of C minor, and then goes up the arpeggio. but then he jumps to a ninth. It's really nice. And then the next one he plays is on the C7, just as we've seen, he plays this G minor. So he goes there. Yeah. Another classic example is a night in Tunisia. Here we have a E flat 7 chord there, and the melody is based on a B flat minor triad, basically, but we go half step under, so it's kind of major 7th sound, or a lower neighbour tone, and up to the 9th again, just like Charlie Christian. And 5th, and then an approach tone into D minor because it's going down the semitone, right? So these minor sounds with ninths are just really nice. Actually, often, just for straight minors, you'll often find ninths and seconds, or whatever you want to call them, added to minor chords. Now we're going to get into our resolving dominants. So we've got two colours here. The first one is the C7 flat 9, or diminished sound. So often people think about this as taking a diminished 7th chord a half step above. So over C7 you play C sharp diminished. I do it the Barry Harris way, which is that we substitute on the 3rd of the chord. So the 3rd of C7 is E, which is this. And this might seem a little more awkward, but it actually makes the relationship to the 1 chord really clear. Because if I'm going C7 to F minor, say, I'm going half step up, E diminished to F minor. And I find that actually quite easy to think about. It's just a half step. Yeah? And this is such a classic thing for use in bop, swing, all that kind of stuff. And we can just like take, for instance, the 3rd of the original C7, which is now the root of the diminished chord, and go, and use that as a way into F minor. So it's a really important part of Barry's teaching as well. And it makes a beautiful, almost classical sound. Okay, next resolving sound is the tritone. The tritone sub is really well known. This gives you some beautiful colours. The tritone from C is F sharp, so if we put an F sharp triad over C, you get these rich sounds. So you've got the flat 5, the flat 7, and you've also got the flat 9. You can also play that as a dominant chord, of course. And then you get the 3rd as well. When you get a tritone sub, the 3rd and the 7th flip over C7 to the F7. So if you look at that, you can see my guide tones remain the same even though I'm changing my bass. Which is, I think, an introduction to Limehouse Blues. So I just want to demonstrate it in context. If we take a 2-5-1 going D minor, G7, C major 7th, we're going to take that tritone sub on the G7, and it comes D flat 7, and we could do it with, let's just use the F major. Yep, so we're just using the sort of D flat triad there, and if we're using the dominant chord. Yeah, it creates a really beautiful sort of, but quite dark sort of resolving sound. It's great in minor as well. C minor, so here we've got the D half diminished chord. We're going to use F minor of some kind, maybe F minor major 7th. Now over the G7, we're going to play that D flat triad. Oh, lovely.
Nice.
So those sounds instantly take you more into the bebop world. Okay, majors and minors. The first one, there's kind of two ways you can think about it. I'm going to do it as a minor substitution on major to start off with, and then we'll talk about it in a slightly different way. It's basically the same thing though. So you've got your C major. On top of that, you're going to put a E minor triad. So just like the diminished sub, it's on the 3rd, right? We're going to play E minor, just the triad. And it has a beautiful kind of major 7th sound to it.
Look at me.
So if you look at the major 7th chord, it's already subbed for you there. You can see it's got the Those are all minor triads, E minor triads over the C bass. So you might notice if you play the E minor triad over the C major 7th, C actually starts to sound a little bit tense, which is really interesting. Something that Jordan Clemens drew my attention to, and he got that from Stefan Harris. And actually, if you played a C on top of a major 7th chord, it sounded excruciating. You know, whereas actually you want to have, at least for traditional jazz harmony, that 7th probably in the melody, and if it's not a 7th, probably a 5th or maybe a 3rd, but not the root. Although Jonathan Kreisberg did say he really likes that kind of sound because it is jangly, but that's kind of perhaps more of a contemporary sort of thing, and you can get voicings like this, which are very unusual really for traditional jazz harmony. But they just have the same notes as the major 7th, so the note ordering makes a big difference. But if you just play the minor triad, you've got the major 7th sound right there. You can add a 4th to it if you want, or you could play a full pentatonic scale if you wanted. Now if we take that as a minor 7th, we can make the same relationship as we did earlier and say that it's the same thing as a G major 6th. And if I take that G6 and put it on the C major 7th, you end up with something that Barry Harris calls the 6th on the 5th. So G, the 5th, 6th chord on C. And it gives you C major 9th really. Now if I play that C major 7th again, and you play the G6 sound, or G major pentatonic over the top, it has the same effect, right? It brings out the upper extensions of the chord, the 9ths and the 7ths, although not the 13ths and 11ths. That might have to wait for another day. We'll do something quite similar with the minor chord. And for this, we're just going to play, instead of a major 6th sound, we're going to actually have to turn that E, the 6th, into an E flat. So we end up with something that's like a major flat 6th. This is a beautiful sound. And if you rearrange the notes, you might see it as being an E flat major 7 sharp 5 as well. I think of it as being on G. I call that the Brahms Peggio. I've got a video on that and how you can use that on slash chords that if you're feeling interested you can watch here. And this sound is beautiful on minor, but it's not used that much. On the whole, I find that most bebop era players tend to, if they're not just playing a melodic minor scale or something, they tend to stick on the triad notes mostly, always, or the minor 6th notes of the minor chord. Where this sort of thinking comes into its own is if we use it on a substituted minor, so for instance D minor on G7. By the way, this is one of those Barry Harris 5-4-3-2 phrases there. This is what we call a 3 phrase. We start on the 3rd, we play the major chord off the 5 and do it for C minor. That's a really good little Barry Harris phrase, and if I put that on G7, you get that Lydian dominant sound, which is really nice. Not that Barry Harris called it that. It's a great sound, but it tends to be used a little less. A lot of the time we'll just hear people playing around with a minor triad, often with a passing second. It's really common in bop, and then also the major 6th. Charlie Christian. So we're just going to hear this applied to Autumn Leaves. I've tried to use all of the subs we've talked about today. Really important to apply this to as many tunes as you can to build your muscles. I would start with just one basic sub, so maybe do, I don't know, tritone sub for everything, and then maybe do the 4-for-2 sub for everything, and then so on, just to get strong at making those sorts of connections. It's a bit like mental arithmetic. I'm sorry about that. It is one of the things that requires a bit of input. Hope that's helpful. This is kind of a lot of what I do, really, to be perfectly honest. And I think it gives you all the melodic minor harmony and stuff like that, even though I haven't actually talked about it. Have you noticed? But yet it's all there. Low Korean sharp 2s, Lydian dominants, altered scales, all of that stuff. But you haven't had to think about scales. Okay, let me know how you get on with that, and I'll see you on the next one.